Tahoe, then continue with the word tea and then the word club. The complete website is TaheeboTeaClub.com or call us at 818-610-8088, Monday through Saturday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. California time. That's 818-610-8088, TaheeboTeaClub.com.
This is KCAA.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about, an interesting and I got to argue, an important day here in the country as we look at what happened on Wednesday. As before our U.S. Supreme Court, you had a case being argued that could upend this country in a very scary way and could give the court system really the ultimate power to decide what happens in our lives with very little control from we the people. Basically, kings and queens and little dictators in robes and that kind of fun. And this is the thing that gets me. I remember when John Roberts was being confirmed. It was the world of stare decisis. It was the world of decided law, and Roberts said he was going to call balls and strikes. And when he said that, I wish I would have said, in which game? Because he's not playing the game where the balls and strikes are being called, because the strike zone is, massive. Because, this court has been overturning what has been decided law. And in fact, in a lot of places, just kind of making stuff up as they go along. And this is what conservatives have wanted to do for a very long time. It's why they've spent so much money in taking over the courts. It's why they've spent so much time and effort in grooming people like Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett and the rest of them. This is the payoff time. These are the moments that corporate America, the very wealthy, are going to get their return on investments. And I hope people are paying attention to what's going on in our Supreme Court, because ultimately, this is a big deal. So what happened on Wednesday is kind of a big deal, and that's why I want to spend the whole first half hour of today's program talking with somebody who I view as an expert on the Supreme Court, someone who follows the Supreme Court and has real insight of what could happen if the Supreme Court makes this decision to overturn what has been decided law since 1984 with this thing called Chevron deference. And we'll talk a little bit about this at the beginning of the next segment. But this is why elections matter. We have allowed the court to be packed with corporatists. We've allowed the court to be packed with hand-picked folks from our wealth class. And someone said to me the other day that Clarence Thomas, it doesn't get bought by Harlan Crow and the wealthy. And I say, no, it's not a quid pro quo thing. It's not hey, I'm going to pay you to do this one little thing and make this decision. No, it's a lifetime of grooming. They have groomed the Supreme Court to know exactly what our wealth class wants, what they need, how they think, what their hopes, their dreams, their needs, their wants, all of that. So they don't have to say jump and them ask how high. They already know. And this is part of this. And this is what's kind of frightening to me about where we are in this country with our Supreme Court. So I got a lot of questions on this most recent hearing, where this can take us, where this all could bring us. And when we come back, our good friend Ian Millhiser is going to be here to share some thoughts on what happened on Wednesday in front of the Supreme Court. And you're not going to want to miss this. You're going to want to stick around after the break. So right back after this, I want to hear your thoughts. Does the Supreme Court have too much power? Or is that why we call them supreme? Should we be reining in some of the craziness? Back after this.
It doesn't matter what kind of weather. It doesn't matter what time of day or night. When Mother Nature's done her worst, the only thing that matters to us is keeping the lights on for you. The hardworking women and men of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, dedicated to keeping the power on in communities all across the country. Because when bad weather strikes, we know what matters most. IBEW, the power professionals.
So on Wednesday, the U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments in the Loper Bright Enterprises versus Ramiando and Relentless versus Department of Commerce cases that they, I guess, have combined to hear on this one thing. And from what I understand, it's widely viewed, widely believed that these cases could be the end of what is something called the Chevron deference. This comes out of the Chevron versus Natural Resources Defense Council thing. Decided a long time ago, back in 1984. Decided law. That thing that John Roberts said he was all behind, balls and strikes kind of thing. And what it basically says is if the courts it admits the courts don't know everything, and that maybe they should leave some decisions up to, I don't know, people who do know stuff. For instance, there are a number of government agencies, I don't know, like the EPA, who do know stuff. And quite frankly, I do trust scientists at the EPA a whole heck of a lot more than a gaggle of guys wearing robes. And I know some women too, yeah, but here's much more than them. But what I think this would do, and we're going to find out in a second if I'm right or if I'm wrong, if this goes the wrong way, we could have, 6 little dictators sitting in robes on a court in this country deciding virtually everything that happens to our environment, our food, our water, everything. And here to share some thoughts on maybe I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but here to share some thoughts on what the arguments were on Wednesday and maybe some gut feeling on how this could go. I've asked Ian Millhiser to come talk with us. Ian's a senior correspondent over at Vox. He's also the author of The Agenda, How a Republican Supreme Court is Reshaping America. This might be a little bit of that part. Ian, thanks for taking time for us.
It's good to be here. Thanks so much.
So, walk me through what this is. What are these? What are these combined cases? What's this going to do? How bad could this be?
So this is simultaneously, I think, one of the most technical and confusing areas of the law, but also like these two cases are two of the biggest cases that the Supreme Court will decide potentially in my lifetime. So what the issue is here is, of course, there's all sorts of federal agencies, the Department of Energy, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Labor, there's all these independent agencies, and Congress has given these agencies the power to issue what are called regulations. And these regulations deal with all kinds of things. What sort of device does a power plant need to install in order to reduce its emissions? Who qualifies for overtime pay if they work more than 40 hours in a week? What vaccines does your insurance company have to cover? And in some areas, what are your cable rates? For your cable TV. So just any issue you can think of, these agencies have some finger in it or another. And it's often unclear what these laws are telling the agencies to do. So to give you an example, the Clean Air Act says that certain power plants have to use the best system available to reduce emissions. Well, what's the best system?
Yeah, who decides that?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a climate scientist. I'm not an engineer. I don't know how who do you want to decide that question? You want climate scientists and engineers to decide that question because they are most likely to know what the correct answer is. And so what the Supreme Court said in a case called Chevron is when you have these laws that say, okay, figure out what the best system is to do something. That decision should be made by the agency, which is made up of experts who actually know what they're talking about, and not made by judges who are just people with law degrees who probably don't have any specialized expertise at all in whatever the agency is doing. What the Supreme Court is threatening to do in these two new cases, Loper Bright and Relentless, is overrule Chevron, say that henceforth the final word on all of these questions will be made by judges and not by the agencies. And I mean, there's two reasons why that's a terrible idea. One is that the courts aren't going to be good at this. They don't know anything. They don't have enough staff to make these decisions well. And second of all, like, the agencies, the reason this power is given to agencies is because agencies are responsible to the president. If you don't like what the government is doing, you vote for someone else. Judges serve for life. You can't get rid of judges. So
Right.
if the Supreme Court is the last word on everything, then you're just stuck with the 9 people who are up there, and there's nothing you can do about it.
As you were going through all this, my mind went to I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Idiocracy.
Yeah.
But my mind started going to the court scene where, maybe this is where our court system's going to go. The judges don't know all this stuff. They're not going to have the time or the resources. So maybe we're just going to go and spin the wheel.
Right.
And maybe this is the future of, or maybe it's going to be who has the deepest pockets, the best lobbyists, but it's certainly not going to be who wants the best outcomes, I fear. And this is where, I struggle with these kind of decisions. But here's the thing. I remember John Roberts. John Roberts, while he was trying to be a justice, was talking about balls and strikes. This is decided law. This has been long decided law. Why now is this up for destruction?
I mean, the only explanation I can come up with is partisanship. Chevron was decided in 1984, so first of all, it's a 40-year-old precedent. And second of all, it was decided smack dab in the middle of the Reagan administration, as Reagan was cruising to a landslide election victory. And if you go back and you look at the commentary on Chevron immediately after it was handed down, it's conservatives who are praising it. I mean, remember Ken Starr, the Clinton inquisitor? He was a federal judge before he went after Bill Clinton. He praised this decision. Justice Scalia, the conservative icon, gave a big lecture at Duke Law School where he talked about how, this is so much better than what happened before. This really takes account of how government actually operates. This is going to be great. And the reason you had so many of these conservative luminaries praising this decision is, again, Ronald Reagan was president. And I mean, whatever you think of Reagan, like, he really did crush it in 1984. So, like, Republicans weren't that worried about losing power. And so they thought, hey, we want to give power to these agencies that are controlled by our guy because he'll do the things that, that we want.
We want him to do, right.
And what started, when, like, the Federalist Society and the Republican Party and all these conservative institutions started turning against Chevron, it was when Barack Obama was reelected. And it
Surprise.
Yeah, surprise. And it's not hard to guess why, because in 1984 Ronald Reagan was ascendant. The courts still had a lot of liberal Johnson and Carter appointees who were handing down decisions Republicans didn't like. So they thought, we're going to shift power from the judiciary to the Reagan administration. That's going to be great for the Republican Party. And then in the Obama administration, they had the opposite problem. Barack Obama had just been reelected. The polls showed that Democrats were doing great. The courts had, the Supreme Court had a Republican majority. The courts were at that point were dominated by Bush and Reagan appointees. And so what did the Federalist Society start saying? What did all these Republicans start saying? Oh, we got to shift power back to the institution that we control. And now, of course, the Supreme Court has a 6-3 Republican supermajority. I mean, look, I'm not a big fan of Ronald Reagan. He won that election. When you win an election, you get to govern. That's how it's supposed to work in a democracy. We had an election in 2020. Joe Biden won that election. And I just think that's the right rule. Like, Chevron is the right rule. Like, if I don't like President Reagan, my recourse is to go to the polls and try to get as many people that I want to go to the polls as possible. And if the Federalist Society doesn't like Joe Biden, I've got good news for them. There's an election coming up in November. But what they shouldn't be allowed to do is shift all this power to an institution that they control.
But this has also been, as you pointed out, since the Obama years forward, and I would argue even maybe a little bit before that, during the Bush years, the idea of consolidating power in the courts and using the courts to to justify all of the things that they've been doing, and trying to recreate this country in this mold that never was, and using the courts to justify it. And this is where it's kind of scary to me that this is just another one of those things that potentially could go by the wayside of what we've expected our country to look like, that in a couple of years it might not look like.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, it does, and it's a bizarre thing for them to fixate on, because here's why. Like, you may remember the student loans case from like several months ago. You may remember about a year ago there was a case involving what was called the Clean Power Plan. This was, EPA regulations that were supposed to reduce greenhouse emissions, and in both cases the Supreme Court vetoed those regulations. I mean, both of those arose through the same mechanism I was describing earlier, where Congress passed a law saying to an agency, hey, you get to decide what the policy is in this space. The agency decided what the policy was going to be, and then the Supreme Court vetoed that determination, invoking this thing they called the major questions doctrine. Now, the major questions doctrine is made up. Like, it's not in the Constitution, it's not in any law anywhere. But essentially what it says is that when an agency tries to do something really ambitious, really big, then the Supreme Court has the power to veto it. What overruling Chevron would do is it would essentially impose the major questions doctrine on every decision that the federal government makes, including stuff that very few people care about. Like, the Relentless case and the Loper-Bright case, the actual regulation and issue in those cases is about whether or not fishing boat operators have to pay to have a federal observer on board to make sure that they aren't overfishing or otherwise damaging the fisheries. And I mean, I guess if you run a fishing boat, you care a lot about that but how many people run fishing boats?
Right.
Like, Chevron cases deal with stuff, there's a case involving like whether a town in Minnesota, in Massachusetts, I think, was like operating its sewage plant in the right way. There's a case about whether a town in Hawaii needed to have regulation of its cable TV rates. I mean, these are small bore issues. And the thing that I don't get, I mean, when you add up all these small bore issues, it adds up to a lot. But if you're, say, Brett Kavanaugh, do you want to spend your time deciding what the cable television rate should be in a small town in Hawaii? Do you want to spend your time thinking about how much nitrogen can be emitted by a wastewater plant in a medium-sized town in Massachusetts? Or do you actually want to spend your time on important stuff? And so, like, I find this bizarre because they've already said they can veto important stuff. Why do they, again, these are 9 justices. They have 4 law clerks each, and that's not very much staff. They don't have the capacity.
Right.
To process all of these issues. I mean, these are issues that historically have been managed by tens of thousands of federal employees. And now we're going to give it to 9 justices and their 4 clerks apiece?
Again, back to my spinning wheel. Back to the spinning wheel. That's how we're going to decide it. But is there a way, because I read your piece, and I think your piece is fantastic. And we'll get links out on how folks can take a look at your piece. On this case, because I think it's important. It's titled John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett are unsure if they should be in charge of everything inside the Supreme Court's argument, asking if the justices should crown themselves kings and queens, written by Ian Millhiser over at Vox.com. Not Fox.
Yeah, Vox, not Fox.
With a V, Vox. But, and the reason that is there a way that this is narrowed, because as you pointed out, when I read it was about the shipping boat, the fishing boat, and it was a couple $100 a day that goes to this monitor. Is there a way where they carve this out and go, okay, you win, but only in this narrow way? And I know I talked about this, back when when Roe was up, that there might be a way for a narrow victory, and they completely blew me out of the water on that. Do you see a narrow victory, or do you see them just blowing this out of the water potentially?
So I think that there's four possible outcomes here. One, the least likely outcome is that they just uphold Chevron and leave the law the way that it's been for the last 40 years. I don't think that's likely, but they could do that. The second is that they could overrule Chevron and say, henceforth, the Supreme Court is in charge of the executive branch. And like that strikes me as fairly likely. And then there are two middle ground ways that they could go. One is, and, this is something that the Chief Justice floated at one point. There's actually a pretty good argument that if you read the statute governing who should pay for observers on fishing boats, it says that some fishing boats can have the boat has to pay, but not others. And there's a decent argument that these particular boats are in the not others category. And so the court could just say, look, like, it doesn't matter what the agency said. The statute says they don't have to pay, so they don't have to pay. And like, if the court goes with that, fine. I mean, like, who cares who pays for these observers on fishing boats unless you own a fishing vessel? Like, fine, they could do that. We could all be happy with that, and that would just punt the question of what happens to Chevron. The other thing that they could do is that they could narrow Chevron without killing it entirely, and that would depend a lot on what the Supreme Court says. There was a lot of talk at the oral argument about overruling a different opinion called Brand X. And what Brand X basically says is that an agency is allowed to change its mind. So an agency can say, like, a power plant has to use this device to reduce emissions, and then if several years later it decides that actually a different device makes sense, or if several years later there's a different president, and that different president wants to have a different policy, fine. Like that's what Brand X said. And so the Supreme Court could conceivably overrule this and essentially say that each agency gets one crack at it. I don't think that would be a great outcome because, like, first of all, like, sometimes you just learn new facts and you want to change things.
Technology changes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we have all lived through that before. I hired one contractor. I hired one plumber because, like, I had a problem and he didn't do a bad job and he didn't do a good job. So I hired a different plumber the second time because I learned new facts. Like that's just how things work. And I think that it also creates bad incentives if you overrule Brand X, because if each agency gets one crack at everything, then whoever is president when that happens is going to tell every agencies, all right, decide every question now because we get one shot at it. And that's, that doesn't strike me as healthy.
No, I'm with you.
Yeah, but my point is there are some middle grounds here that would still be disruptive, but not necessarily as disruptive as overruling Chevron.
So in watching the arguments, any gut reaction? I mean, I got the sense that Alito and Thomas are always always in favor of destroying stuff. So let's rip and tear in their world, and Gorsuch, I'm sure, was on board with them as well. Where you put the rest of them?
Yeah. So yeah, there were four justices: Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh, who were just all in on getting rid of Chevron. And if anything, the most vocal justice in favor of getting rid of Chevron, next to Gorsuch, who's championed this for much of his career, was Kavanaugh. And that's troubling because, I mean, Kavanaugh's a really conservative guy, but he's normally at the center of this very conservative court. And so, whatever Kavanaugh says very often goes. And so it's troubling to see Kavanaugh thinking this way. That said, Roberts and Barrett potentially are in play here. The problem is that they both seem to have different concerns. So, like, it was Roberts, like I said earlier, who floated the possibility of just kicking the can in the road and saying, look, like, these fishing vessels don't have to pay for the observer, and we'll figure out all the big questions later. And that's consistent. I mean, Roberts sometimes wants the court to do less instead of doing more. So he might kick the can down the road. Barrett raised different concerns. Amy Coney Barrett, I thought she raised very sensible concerns. Like, several times she pointed out, Chevron has been cited by 17,000 lower court decisions. There have been thousands of federal court decisions where like someone didn't like something that some agency did, and there's lots of agencies, and so they filed a lawsuit, and the court said, nope, you lose under Chevron, go away. And if you overrule Chevron, all of these 17,000 cases are potentially reopened.
The dam breaks.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I mean, that's not a good way to run a country, to suddenly have. I mean, I don't know what's in those 17,000 cases. I actually haven't read all of them, but like, that's just a lot of settled questions that are suddenly unsettled all at once. And that's not just good for the country. It's not good for Justice Amy Coney Barrett, because all 17,000 of these cases, if they're reopened, guess whose desks they're eventually gonna land on.
Well, maybe she needs the overtime.
Yeah, who knows? So like, I am hoping that through some combination of Roberts wanting to decide things narrowly and Amy Coney Barrett wanting to see her family ever again, that like the court will decide to stay its hand here, but I'm not particularly optimistic.
So your last question. So your gut feeling on this, does it go away? Do they find that middle ground?
I think that here's what I think is the likeliest outcome. You might remember, I think like a few months ago we were talking about a different case called Rahimi. This was the case where the Supreme Court substantially expanded the Second Amendment in a case called Bruin, and a bunch of judges looked at it and said, well, you know, under Bruin, that means that people who commit domestic violence, like people who have restraining orders against them, are allowed to own guns. And that case went up to the Supreme Court. I listened to the Rahimi argument. The good news is I'm pretty confident that the Supreme Court is going to say, yeah, no. People who like beat their wives do not get to own a gun. I'm pretty sure they're going to draw the line there. But the reason why this Rahimi issue happened in the first place is because they handed a really poorly written, poorly thought through decision in Bruin. They didn't think through the implications of what they're doing. And surprise, now wife beaters get guns. And similarly, if they overrule Chevron, again, I don't know what's in these 17,000 cases that I haven't read, but some lawyer's going to find them. And, I think the same thing is going to happen. They're going to overrule Chevron. There's going to be all of these terrible implications that, many of these terrible implications will be clear within, several months or a year. And then they're probably going to have to come back to this eventually and be like, oh, yeah, we didn't really mean that. Just like in the Rahimi case, they had, we didn't really mean that wife beaters get guns.
Yeah, oops, made a little bit of a mistake.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see where this takes us. But Ian, I appreciate the time. I'm not looking forward to what this decision may be, but I'd love to have you back again real soon.
All right. Thank you so much, Rick. It's great chatting with you.
Good stuff. Our good friend Ian Millhiser. Make sure you check out his work over at vox.com. Vox, not the other one. For our folks watching on Free Speech TV, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time for our radio affiliates. We're going to take a quick break. Right back.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to. Lots to talk about. I'm a huge supporter of manufacturing, huge supporter of domestic production for domestic consumption. Want to make it here, want to build it here. We consume it here, want the jobs here. The one thing that I'm absolutely 110% opposed to is abusing child labor. And this is the part where my Republican friends just don't seem to get it. There's an opportunity. As we're reshoring manufacturing, there's an opportunity to put everybody to work. There's an opportunity to bring people here to this country who want to seek a better life and get them to work. We can do that, and we don't have to go into the schools and pluck children out of the classrooms to fill our cheap labor needs. Don't have to do it. There's a better way, but Well, sadly, our Republican friends in states all across the country are rolling back child labor laws because we need the cheap labor. We need the cheap labor. Sorry, we're addicted to it. Got to have it. So when I see stories like this one coming out of Mississippi, I get mad, I get angry, I get frustrated because we can do better. We should do better. We have to do better. 16-year-old Guatemalan child. The article that I'm reading says worker. No, this is a 16-year-old child. But they put it as the 16-year-old Mississippi poultry plant worker. No, it's a child, 16-year-old kid working in a poultry plant. Died on the job back in July. In a place where have had a history of lots of injuries, lots of accidents, lots of things happening to working people. In fact, over the last several years, there have been numerous fines. This is a place. What was it in the past 5 decades? They've inspected the 5 plants that are in this Mar-Jacks little conglomerate 23 times in the past decade. 23 times in the last 10 years. 3 inspections following a worker's death. Cited 10 times. $102,000, almost $103,000 in fines. But this one, a kid dies. And what's a 16-year-old Guatemalan child's life worth? Well, $212,666. That's what the fine was. That's what it was. So, yeah, $212,000. I got to tell you, it's more than that's been in the past. OSHA cited Mar-Jack with 14 serious violations and 3 others that were less than serious. One of the big ones being that they had no lockout tagout procedures, that they failed to ensure that there were barriers in place so when the workers went into the machinery, they didn't just start, so that they didn't get killed on the job. This kind of a thing. They're also going after the staffing agency, and this is another part of this. Because you've got the company, this Mar-Jacks, this 16-year-old child didn't actually work for them, worked for a staffing agency who worked for them. So there's this, we didn't know the child was only 16. That's on them. And that's the reason that we have such screwed up laws in this country to benefit corporate America, and why we need a complete revamping of our labor laws from top to bottom. From child to senior. But here you got this kid working at the poultry plant, and now a fine for the company. Nobody going to jail. Trust me, nobody's sweating that out. But you have the Department of Labor, and this is why I'm such a big supporter of Joe Biden. His labor department, their wage and hour division, they're the folks who enforce child labor laws, in case you don't know. They have had a task force that's been looking at. The reason we've been hearing a lot about child labor violations is because of this task force that's been out there going, hey, it seems like a lot of kids are working, especially in the poultry industry. You may remember, what was it? It was over the summer. You had that Packers Sanitation Solutions Incorporated, somewhere like Wisconsin, Midwest. They were fined, what was it? I think $1.5 million for illegally hiring more than 100 children to work in their plants. And it's been said that the meatpacking industry in this country would collapse without child labor. Think about that for a second. The meat, the food you put on your table, the children's hands that go into this. It's angering to think that this is the system that we've allowed to get set up around us. Now, this task force is, and look, every day I see something. They are out there going a full you-know-what to the wall. Because we have to stop this. Now, understand, you've got Biden and the task force saying, hey, we got to crack down on this stuff, while simultaneously you've got Republicans, like in Indiana, for instance. No, go ahead at 14 and quit school and go work in that industrial farm. No, by all means, go to work in Florida. Don't worry. Go work in construction at 14, 15, 16. Don't worry about an education. And you look at these red states, because again, it's got to get those kids a little skin in the game. This is not who we are. Now, again, and let me add the caveat. I'm not talking about your children or mine. When we're talking about the children that are working in these jobs, especially in these poultry plants and on these construction jobs, these are minority children. These are poor children. These are immigrant children. But they're children much the same. And I would love to see some people get, I don't know, a little worked up about the fact that we're abusing children and exploiting children in the workforce for profit, for the handful to get richer, for shareholders to pocket more. Just kind of throwing it out there. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back.
From the steel mills of Pennsylvania to the auto factories of Michigan to the modern makers movement, manufacturing makes our nation great. I'm Scott Paul, President of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. We bring business and labor together to advocate for policies that everyone can agree on. Together, we can strengthen manufacturing and create good-paying American jobs. Help us keep it made in America.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The old factory towns in America's heartland have been taking a beating. Thing is, though, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. The new CHIPS bill that got passed will bring jobs back home and has already resulted in big announcements of major new factories opening. The American Recovery Package has allowed cities and counties to hire new police officers and firefighters and start rebuilding their communities again. We're finally turning things around after 40 years of screwing over working people. But will we keep moving in the right direction? That's our choice.
The best way to strengthen America's economy? How about investing in America's fastest growing industry? Clean energy. It means millions of jobs that pay well and can't be outsourced. And lower utility costs for families. Congress, let's get it done.
So recently I had this this very interesting, bizarre conversation with a listener who has an interesting view that whoever they are, and I'm sure got this from Donald Trump, but they are going to turn our entire military electric. We're going to have electric tanks, evidently, and the electric tanks are going to get like a mile and a half per charge, and we're going to have vehicles that charge the electric tanks, and it's going to be this whole electric tank charging thing, and we're gonna lose wars because of the Green New Deal that Joe Biden signed. A whole bunch of this fantasy stuff, and I know where this comes from. A little over a year ago, Donald Trump, just spewed this out at one of the rallies. And if you watch the rallies, there's a lot of made up stuff on the moment that nobody really fact checks much anymore. This is one of the things that got fact checked, and it's total BS. But it's amazing how people then, if Donald Trump said it, it's got to be true. It's like the internet. If it's there, it's got to be true. And here to share some thoughts on, are we going to have an EV military? Will we have an electric military? And, will we have all Chinese-made EVs? Because evidently, if you remember a couple months ago, Donald Trump said that the auto workers were being sold down the river by their leadership, and their leadership should endorse him because EVs are going to be made in China, and a whole bunch of craziness. And that's why I've asked our good friend Scott Paul to come help me work through this pile of insanity. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick. Good to be with you.
You're the guy. You're the manufacturing guy, head of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. You're the guy who has your thumb on the pulse. You're the guy who it's your job to keep up on the latest, the greatest, the news of the day. Are we going to have electric tanks? Is this the future of our military? That we're going to have green tanks? Is that going to happen?
Yeah, Rick, all I have to say is the United States has always been a great innovator when it comes to making sure we have a modern, superior military, including the vehicles. So while we may have some research going on that looks at how you can incorporate things like batteries with a lot of storage life or what have you, that doesn't equate to making all of our tanks run on batteries within the next 5 or 10 years. Okay, so and in fact, it would be kind of criminal if the Department of Defense and the research agencies weren't looking at how you employ kind of like new forms of energy into your weapon systems and into your battle planning. Down the road. But that's neither here nor there, because what happens is someone takes a nugget from something and then turns it into something else, and all of a sudden you have this big blown up conspiracy. But no, our tanks are going to run what they're going to run, what they're running on now for the foreseeable future, unless and until there is a better way to get them from point A to point B.
Yeah, but I know where this came from. This comes from one of Donald Trump's speeches, at one of those rallies where he just stands there for hours and just makes stuff up. In our mainstream media, they just kind of let it roll off. Where like recently he said, well, we're going to be when we win, we're going to be in the White House for 4 years and beyond. And that didn't really catch anyone's attention, other than to go, well, no, and beyond means we break the two-term thing. That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But we just kind of let a lot slide with the Red Hat Brigade, and that's what's frightening to me.
Well, it is in part because everybody else is held to a different standard. One and done for everybody else. But when there is such a wave of misinformation or disinformation or inaccuracies coming at you not only every day but every hour, you get selective about it. You say, well, this is not as bad as that, and you play that game, and that's the wrong approach.
Right.
You gotta be. You can't let the Pinocchio test get broken.
So with that in mind.
Yes.
With that in mind, because I got to go back to, again, this idea that Trump has put out that, all the EVs are going to be made in China, and almost no point in doing it because the auto workers are not going to have any jobs. All the EVs are going to be made in China. Is that accurate? And is that a mandated future? Is that written in stone somewhere that our auto workers can't make electric vehicles?
It is not, but I tell you what, we will have a Chinese future in this if there is no industrial policy in the United States. And I'll tell you why. I mean, right now, and up until very recently, the largest electric vehicle company in the world was Tesla, which was homegrown and, in fact, funded by Department of Energy research grants at the very beginning. Notwithstanding Elon Musk's perceived brilliance in all of this, it was actually DOE grants and loans that helped Tesla really get a foothold and become the largest EV company in the world. However, China has invested steadily and heavily in this over the last decade or more, and has a couple of homegrown companies of its own, and has a lot of capacity. Now, the issue is this. People are buying electric vehicles. It is exponentially more than it was 5 years ago, and 5 years ago was exponentially more than it was the 5 years before that. And this is going to continue to grow, whether people want it to or not. It's something that's just it's going to happen.
Yep.
The only question here is, where are these vehicles going to be made? Okay, that is the only question. Not whether they're going to be made, but where are they going to be? And if we have tariffs as Biden has kept in place on Chinese electric vehicles, 27.5%, if we have an industrial policy that helps to get this industry turbocharged in the United States so that it's more than Tesla, so that it is, GM and Ford and all the other entrants, Rivian, and all the other makers who want to come make their vehicles here. We're creating the ecosystem and the charging infrastructure for that. That's what gets us in the game, because if we don't, this is what's going to happen. And this is unfortunately what Trump doesn't say. It's not like all the internal combustion engine factories in the United States are going to stay. No, they will go, and they will go as these super cheap Chinese vehicles come into the United States and overtake the market. And I'm just going to say, not on my watch, not going to happen. And so that's why we need the right combination of policies. And while Trump does, I think, get the tariff aspect of this, he doesn't get the other stuff. And he's completely wrong about it and the type of impact it would have on our economy.
I mean, he's right in the fact that the auto workers won't have jobs if we do what he wants to do. And for me, the idea of moving to electric vehicles, I'm all in favor of it. I know people who have them. They're fabulous. In fact, I've driven in one once, and much quicker, much faster. I'd like one.
Yeah.
To be quite frank, but it is the future, as you've said, and I want it to be built here.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's hard to say. And I've said before, domestic production for domestic consumption. This should be our policy.
Yeah. And look, I just want to say, it's not like the government is going to come take away people's internal combustion engines or whatever the hell.
No, it's like anything. It's gonna eventually go away.
Yeah, but it will, as folks discover the performance, as they get the batteries better, as they get the charging infrastructure built out, it's going to be great. Because look, I drive. You said we have a Chevy Volt, which is a hybrid, but we use it mostly for commuting, and I put about 3 gallons of gas in it the whole year, and that is a great feeling. I will say, when you're not doing it, it is awesome, and so people will discover that, and they'll discover it, by the way, not through Chevy Volts or Teslas, but through Ford F-150 pickup trucks and the SUVs and the other stuff that Americans love to buy. And those prices will be coming down, and again, the infrastructure will be in place. But here's the issue. If we stop all of that, it's not like it's going to go away, and it will be Chinese, guaranteed. And it will be directly from China, or it will be Chinese companies that are setting up factories in Mexico to take advantage of the U.S.-Mexico free trade agreement, and they'll be coming to the United States through the back door that way. I don't want that to happen. I think that's an existential threat to the manufacturing ecosystem.
I absolutely agree with you. And talking about manufacturing, I got to tell you, I'm a big Joe Biden fan. I think he is doing something that no president in my lifetime has done, and that's turning the tide of losing manufacturing jobs and losing our ability to have manufacturing as a key component of our GDP. In fact, it's been a long downward trend of manufacturing's share of GDP. Some of the analysis that I've looked at going back into the early 2000s, we've been losing share. I think it was back then, it was manufacturing accounted for like 13% of GDP. By 2020, it was down to almost a little over 10%. Biden's turning that around through massive investments. I mean, I was looking at some numbers. In October of 23, we saw almost $19 billion going into the construction of manufacturing plants in this country. And that's up 73% from the October of 2022, up 136% from 21, up 166% from 19. And you just look at the month-over-month increases that are just staggering, and it comes back to it's the policies of this administration that are finally having an industrial policy and investing in this stuff that's bringing and reshoring this manufacturing back to our shores.
That's right. And let's just stipulate that this is not accidental and it's not cyclical. It is directly the result of policy. And that policy is to make sure that we're investing in the industries of today and of tomorrow. And it's having an impact. As you indicate, we've stabilized under this administration. This is the first time, kind of post World War II, that we've actually added more manufacturing jobs back than we lost during a recession that occurred during the pandemic. So that's number one. Number two, to your point on construction, we've seen a construction boom in manufacturing facilities unlike anything we've seen in our lifetimes, either of our lifetimes. And and Rick, let me just say this: like, you know, you're in Pennsylvania. I was raised in the Midwest. If you would have asked someone, you know, anytime over the last 20 years whether you thought that there'd be a massive factory built in the United States that employed 2,500 new people somewhere, everybody would be like, that's not happening. They're all closing down. And so, but that's exactly what's happening. Not in one location in the United States, but in dozens. And it's in semiconductors, in batteries, in solar panels, in lots of other industries as well. And it's directly the result of this policy of we're having tariffs on the outside that are helping to level the playing field, and investment on the inside that's helping to build that workforce back up, that's helped to offset the cost of capital that it takes to get those enterprises up and running and to create a market for all of it through consumer incentives. And it's having a profoundly positive impact on manufacturing in this country.
How come we aren't hearing about this? You know, I say this to people and they're like, oh, no, there's none of this happening. You're just making this up. And I'm going, no, the data's there.
Yeah.
You know, the numbers are there. It's all there. You can see these places being built. You know, I keep saying the administration needs to build a website like Josh Shapiro did here in Pennsylvania when the bridge went out, of these buildings being built. You know, maybe with a big Joe Biden image of, you know, him pointing, going, I did that. You could click on little images of factories being built. I don't know, some kind of cute little gimmicky thing to draw people to be able to see this stuff actually happening in real time. Because I don't think the message is getting out.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, like, there's a website. It's invest.gov. You can go there, and there's a map, and you can see where a bunch of this stuff is happening. And it's just the primary stuff. It's not even the secondary stuff. And it would be awesome if you could click on those little dots and get not only the information, but like a live webcam of the construction taking place or whatever. So those free idea for the Biden administration right there from the Rick Smith Show and
there
Scott
you go.
Paul.
Not new. I've been saying this for a very long time. You need to get the PR out there, because or you know, big giant, you know, 20-foot cutouts of Biden going, I did that. Because look, you know, got an election coming out. Need some attention to this, because look, and this is the point. The point is you know, in November of 2024, if Biden isn't reelected, and this is where my view on this is, you don't have to share it, all this stuff can go away. All of the policies, all of these investments, all of this stuff that we've chosen, this direction that we've chosen, can all go away.
Yeah. Look, I you know, we don't have to, you know, regardless of who you support as a candidate, if you look at the policies and the Republicans wanting to defund the clean energy, the EV, some of the other stuff, and to just basically level off infrastructure, you will see all of that decline. There is no question about it, because it is very policy driven. And to your point about no one knowing, I mean, we polled through Morning Consult voters over the summer, have you heard of a new factory being built in your community? And only about 30% of people said yes, even though there's more than that. Have you heard of one being built anywhere in America, a new one? And 36% said yes. So there's a lot of people who need to know about this and to understand that it's happening. And I just know from my road trip that I took over the summer, I saw, you know, the Ford factory being built just off the interstate outside of Memphis. Down in Texas, I saw a semiconductor factory being built just off the interstate there. Outside of Phoenix, I saw another semiconductor factory being built. just out of there. And it was just on and on and on like that all across the United States. And so it is but yeah, it's one of those repetition things, Rick, where unfortunately, whether it's the White House or whomever, you're like, oh, we had a great press conference on this, let's wrap it up and move on to the next thing. No, got to hammer this stuff every day and remind people what you're doing for them. And the good news, Rick, is there's no shortage of sites for the president to go to in Pennsylvania or Ohio or Michigan or Wisconsin, where there is, or North Carolina or Georgia, where there is some of this new construction taking place. There is a great story for them to tell. If they choose to focus on that.
From now to election day, every day at a new place that's being built, that jobs are being created and lives are being made better. I don't know what better you can do as a re-election campaign. But Scott, as always, appreciate the information, appreciate the expertise. Thanks so much.
Rick, great to be with you as always.
Our good friend Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, the website. Want to hear your thoughts. Have you heard of, do you know of, have you seen a new facility being built? Have you worked